Good morning, everybody. If you will bear with us for just a couple of moments, we'd like to wait just in case there are some latecomers before we begin. For those of you who have just joined, we are waiting just a moment or two longer before we begin in case of any latecomers. Well, good morning and welcome to Houston Techfest 2020, the virtual edition. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone's aware of a feature in this presentation that could make it a little bit more interactive for you. Take note of the question mark icon at the upper left corner of your, upper right corner, I think, of your presentation screen. If you click that icon, it'll open up the question and answer feature, which allows you to send me some questions to be delivered to our presenter at the appropriate time. So please feel free to post anytime during the session. We're also really excited to let you know that the Code Mag is giving everyone a free subscription, so you can follow the link posted in the QA section. We're proud to present Todd Little, who will be sharing an introduction to the Kanban Method. Okay, Todd, take it away.
All right, thank you. All right, everyone. I'm Todd Little. I'm the chairman of Kanban University, and this morning I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the Kanban method, an introduction, and going through the elements of what it is and why it's important. So why Kanban? What is it that's so special about Kanban? Why is it that it's something you should learn about? Well, what we're saying is that Kanban is becoming far more prolific. It's a lot more people are using it. This is from the 2019 Scrum Master Trends survey. 81% were using Kanban in addition to Scrum, or at least thought they were using Kanban. So this has been growing significantly over time. Earlier years it was 20%, then 40%, then 60%, and now 80%. So Kanban is something that's out there, and so even if you're a Scrum shop, something that you definitely should be looking at. But it's also something that goes beyond that. So the other types of things we're seeing, certainly from our perspective as a training organization, we're seeing a lot more growth in Kanban training year on year. We saw an inflection point in 2015, and it's been taking off since that time. This year will be just a bit level. Obviously, hit a bit of a downturn due to the COVID situation, as we've successfully now pivoted to a virtual training offering. So we had been only offering physical training before, but now offering virtual training, and will be about the same as we did last year. So I don't see the same growth, but I think the trends now are picking up, and we're now June and July have been higher than prior years. So, Kanban's got a lot of interest and is growing, and it's taking off. So why is that? Why is it about Kanban that's making it so interesting for people? And I think some of the issues are that business problems persist. Challenges that people have in the business, such as getting true business agility, getting predictability, operating efficiently, operating at scale, and continuous improvement. These are all types of things that organizations and businesses have challenges with, and it's things that Kanban is particularly well suited to try to help. And particularly now that we've come out with the Kanban maturity model, which I'll go into at the end of the presentation, these are all things that we have really addressed in a very, very robust approach to the Kanban method. So what is Kanban? What is it that we're talking about when we talk about Kanban? So this is what a lot of people think Kanban is. A bunch of stickies on a wall, a simple to-do, in progress, done, just a visual representation of tracking progress. And to a certain extent, there is an element that this is a starting point for Kanban. This is an element of Kanban. The visualization is an element, but the visualization is not the only thing. There's much more to Kanban than just a simple board like this. Now, the nice thing is a simple board like this actually can help an organization or a team quite a lot. I mean, it brings visibility to unhidden work, or to hidden work. So we're unhiding that work. And that's quite valuable to be able to do that. But there's even more to it than that. This is just the first level, and there's much more to it than that. So, how many people see Kanban as they see Kanban as a framework within the Agile umbrella? This is something that had been promoted by people, is that this is what Kanban is from the Agile perspective. From the Kanban University perspective, we say Kanban is much bigger. We see Kanban as an approach to managing knowledge work, which goes well beyond software development, well beyond IT. We see Kanban applied in marketing. We see it applied in the legal field. We're seeing it applied in geosciences and so all over the place we're seeing Kanban applied. Anytime we're dealing with knowledge work is in a place where Kanban can be applied. So what really is it then? So this is what we say it is. We say that the Kanban method is a tool for evolutionary change in managing knowledge work. It teaches organizations how to understand, visualize, and measure systems of work to continually improve and consistently deliver effective results. The Kanban method provides a set of proven practices and approaches that scale from individuals and teams to the enterprise. Yes, Kanban boards, as you see at the bottom, they're a very critical part of it, but the essence of Kanban is it's entirely trying to look at the entire flow of work and how can we continually evolve that and improve flow of work through the system, all the way from the upstream through the downstream, and in a predictable manner through a pull system. So when we talk about evolutionary change, one of the things that differentiates Kanban from some other more traditional process changes and often from what's sort of viewed as an agile transformation, traditional change is an A to B process. We sort of say, here's our current process, and here's our future process, this wonderful place we'd love to be in the future, and we're going to transform it. We're going to make a big transformation. Now, the irony of this is that in order to do this type of activity, this future process is a designed in advance approach, which is effectively a big bang waterfall approach to an agile transformation. The Kanban approach is quite different. The Kanban approach does not talk in terms of transformation. The Kanban approach talks in terms of starting with what you do now and doing evolutionary change. So if we look at this from a capability growth in the same map, we have a current state of capability. And we want to get to this future state that has some better capability. And so we think, let's go there. We charge ahead. We design it out and charge ahead. The problem with this is it doesn't work that way. What usually happens when you start a change initiative is that you have what we call a J curve. And in the J curve, things get worse a little bit before they get better. This is something that Virginia Satir found when she was working with change initiatives, primarily with family situations. But we've discovered that this approach works pretty much the same way in business initiatives as well. You start with doing something, you'll get a little bit worse, but then eventually you can get better, as long as you're persistent with it, and it actually has designed the system change correctly. The challenge here is safety. It's going to get worse. Are you able to handle that amount of degradation and the time it's going to take in order to actually get better? What we found is that low maturity organizations will frequently panic under stress. They're not able to say, oh no, things have gotten worse. I've got to get back and let's revert back to where we were. So the panic sets in. They actually don't get the result. And in fact, that's what we also see. This is a survey from the Project Management Organization, PMI. If change initiatives, 18% are failures, are downright failures. About 64% get some degree of success, and really only about 18% actually get the success that they were planning based on their future. The Kanban approach is evolutionary change. It's different. What we do is we take small incremental changes to design. We avoid the failure mode of large designed and managed transformations. What we look for is evolutionary change, which is not a transformation, but which is transformational. Eventually, we get the future state, we get beyond, and potentially we even get beyond some future state, we thought, because we're working through and identifying what is the need at the moment, what changes can we make, what sort of small J curves, small changes that we can make where we can get fairly quick response and change this whole dynamic and do this evolutionary, a much more humane way of managing change. So from the Kanban perspective, in a little bit more detail, we start with an initial process, we evaluate the fitness criteria, how well is that process working, and we design some experiments, we check it out, did it work? If it works, we continue. If it doesn't work, we roll back. We might roll forward to something new. We evaluate, we continue to move around here, and eventually we get to some future process that it's emerging. It's evolving over time. So there's no way to say, well, let's go install Kanban, because what we're installing is, Kanban is not a framework. Kanban is a means for evolutionary change of managing knowledge work. We work through a perspective of going around the rocks. Just like water flows around the rocks. And Bruce Lee said, be like water, go around the rocks. Don't go through the resistance, go around the resistance. And that's the approach we use. We look for small changes that will work. We don't look for excuses of why we can't make some change. We look for what we can do to go around that change. This is part of our overall approach to change management. So with that, Kanban becomes the great unifier. We start with what you do now. If you're in chaos, we can start with that. If you're doing something like SAFe or Scrum, that's perfectly fine as well, or Waterfall, CMMI. These are all places you can start, and then eventually, through Kanban, we will make those changes, evolve it, and it'll eventually look like something different. It'll look like something that is fit for purpose for what you actually need. So with that, let's first check to see this. We're moving on to a new section. Is there any questions so far?
No, Todd. So far, there have been no questions posted.
Okay, no problem. We'll keep on moving. That's just sort of introductory so far. And just as you have questions, make sure you bring them forth. We'd love to be able to make sure we're covering things that matter to you as well, as key to getting your needs across here. So let's move on to the foundations of Kanban. So the elements of the Kanban method, we have change principles, we have service delivery principles, and we have some general practices. And all of that we have surrounded by the Kanban values. And so I'm going to cover the middle section here, the change principles, the service delivery principles, and the general practices. And this is sort of a very very brief summary of these three elements here, and I'll go a little bit more into detail as I go. So this, I'd like to get it all in front of you. The three change management principles. Start with what you do now. And I've bolded this one because I think it's the most critical, the one that people have the hardest time with. And so it's the one I bold out. Start with what you do now. It's really critical that we're not trying to make big changes. We're trying to start with understand what you do now, and then based on that, move forward. We gain agreement to pursue improvement through evolutionary change, and then we encourage active leadership at all levels. Next, we have the service delivery principles. We focus on the customer's needs and expectations. You manage the work and let the workers self-organize around it. And I bold this one again because this is the one sometimes is the hardest. We've got in the approach we do is we focus on managing the work, not the workers. So we're looking for how is work flowing, and then based on that, the management of the workers happens, and to a large extent, we're wanting them to self-organize around that work to make sure it's moving forward. So focus on the work, and then regularly review the network and its policies to improve outcomes. And this is again part of the continuous improvement approach. Then we have the 6 general practices. Visualize, we've seen as a critical part of Kanban boards and visualizing them. Limiting work in progress. And then I've bolded flow because flow is really, all of the other practices are there really to reinforce that we're trying to get work to flow through the system. So flow, managing flow is a key part of the Kanban method. We make policies explicit. We implement feedback loops. And then lastly, we improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. So let's go through each of these a little bit more. The change management principles. Start with what you do now. What this means is understanding the current processes as actually practiced, not as they're documented, right? What are people actually doing? Let's understand what the current situation is and focus on that, because once we understand the system, only then can we really improve it effectively. So start with understanding the system. Respecting existing roles, responsibilities, and job titles. Don't go creating a whole, to us in the Kanban method, reorganization is the last approach we take. We start with the approach of respecting what's currently there, and then let's make the changes necessary. Eventually, there will be times where, yes, a reorganization might be appropriate, but we don't start with that. We start with the perspective of let's really understand and get better at what we do now, and then we make those next changes once we understand this better. What we find typically is we're reorganizing, we're trying to bail out of one problem only to jump into a new one. Better to understand the system first. We then gain agreement to pursue improvement through the evolutionary change, and we encourage active leadership at all levels. So if we look at this in evolutionary change in action, this is a cartoon from David Anderson's book. And we see, I'm stuck, I'm too busy, I'm idle. And then we see, let's do something about it. And we say, well, where's the active leadership here? And to some extent, well, certainly there's an active leadership about let's do something about it. But even the fact that we're surfacing the information is a degree of active leadership. And we're looking for active leadership at all levels in the organization. What small things can we do? And everyone can contribute. It doesn't have to be a person in a leadership role. Anybody can take active leadership in order to spark that improvement and that evolutionary change. In order for us to see change, the formula for that evolutionary change is that there's some stressor. Something has to be people have to be in an unhappy state in some fashion in order to be willing to change. We hear the story, how many people does it take to change a light bulb? Well, only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. You have to have some reason for change. And that's that stressor mechanism. Then there's a reflection. Oh, let's do something about it. Well, let's understand what it is. And then finally, leadership. Let's do something about it. Let's take some action to fix that and design a change, a small change that will work, that will help us and take us in the direction we want to go. So now we'll move on to the service delivery principles. your organization is a network of interdependent services with policies that determine its behavior. So what they were saying is this is a network, right? And there are services that you're delivering in that network and policies. So what we want to do then is understand and focus on the customer's needs and expectations. What is the customer needing? We want to manage the work, let the workers self-organize around it, and regularly review the network and its policies to improve outcomes. So let's look at what we're talking about when we're talking about a service. A service, we have a customer that has a need. They're requesting a product or a service. There's a service delivery mechanism, a team or a collection of teams, a service delivery area that is delivering, responding to that need with a series of activities. And then that fulfills the need and the customer accepts or acknowledges delivery. This can be a simple, it can be a ticket, a request, it can be a service, can be a project that has a complete need that gets delivered against. It can be multiple things. Our approach is that we're in service delivery and we're trying to understand what are the needs, what are the understanding the customers, how are we working on it, and how can we deliver that effectively. So now let's move on to the practices, the 6 practices: visualize, work in progress, manage flow, make the policies explicit, establish feedback loops, and improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally. Let's view this sort of in action from a Kanban lens, Kanban perspective. First, we've got the system. We've got some ideas that are funneling through. Once we've decided yes, we're going to do it, then it's a matter of delivering on those requests, the service requests. And we're going to move into finally fulfilling that need. So this is the system. We want to visualize that full system. So that's the visualize element. We want to understand the system. How is the system working? What is going on today? How do we do that? How do we understand that system? How do we make sure we understand what we're doing today and as actual use? Well, we have an approach called the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. We call it STATIK as the acronym for that. And what we're going to do, this is what we do, and this is how we start all the times when we're designing, this is our approach we use for designing our Kanban system, is we go through this process. For each service, we're going to identify the service, and for each one of those services, we're going to understand what makes the service fit for purpose. What is it that's making, what is the fitness criteria? What is it that makes the delivery of that meet the needs of the customers? We're then going to understand the sources of dissatisfaction regarding the current delivery. What is making people unhappy? And those are both internal and external. What's making the service delivery team unhappy? That's an important element. What's making customers unhappy? What are the external sources of dissatisfaction? Customers and stakeholders, what are they unhappy with? Because those sources of dissatisfaction are what will drive the motivation for change. What's that motivation that says, okay, let's do something about it? We then analyze the sources and nature of the demand and analyze our current delivery capability. How are we in balance or out of balance between the nature of demand and the nature of our ability to deliver? We then model the service delivery workflow. How are work items and activity, knowledge discovery activities, how are they flowing through the system? What does it take to get something from an idea to an actual delivery? So that's the modeling the flow, the workflow. We then identify and define classes of service. These are how we're going to treat the work. How are we going to, are there some items that are going to be treated with a higher priority, some items that need to be expedited, some items that have fixed dates of delivery. These are the classes of services that we look at, because that helps us understand our overall policies and our overall treatment of the work in the workflow. We then design the Kanban system, design our initial Kanban system that says how is this work flowing and how are we working with it, and we socialize the design and negotiate implementation. Now you'll notice this is iterative. This is a process. This is not just done once and then we move on. This is something that we look at and continuously and revisit to see how has things changed, because this is sort of our baseline approach of understanding what's that next step of implementation, what's that next thing, what's the new source of dissatisfaction that's come up now that we've made a couple of changes along the way. Something new will be changed, something new will be dissatisfier, and let's look at what we can do to work towards improving those dissatisfaction and make it much better fit for purpose, much improvement in the service delivery. So now that we visualize, we've understood the system, now we can start looking at it. We can start looking at what can we do to help improve flow. How can we focus on flow? What can we do to make sure that work is moving through the system? Not necessarily how workers are efficient. We don't look at worker efficiency, we look at flow efficiency. How is the work flowing and how is the flow working through the system? We look at balancing demand and capacity. Are we in balance between what's coming into the system and what we're actually able to deliver? So there's approaches that we can take for working with that, improving flow or potentially shaping the demand. We can limit the work in progress. Why do we limit the work in progress? By limiting work in progress, it gives us improved predictability. It helps us know what we have, and it helps us focus on flow. Limiting work in progress helps us improve our flow, our overall flow and flow efficiency. And one of the things when we do this also, it helps us understand and identify bottlenecks, which we can then use approaches in the Kanban method for improving those bottlenecks. There's a number of different approaches we have available for tuning our systems because we're so focused on trying to get to flow. We can then scale out. We can take this to systems, multiple systems. We start with one system at a time, but then we scale out to multiple systems because as we've said, we're a network of interconnected systems of delivery. So we scale out. And then we start looking at metrics that will help us incremental process improvement through measurement. We're very much focused on trying to understand designed experiments that have measurements, which we can then use to make improvements and make new experiments. And then finally, fitness improvements through feedback. Feedback is a critical element of the Kanban method, making sure that as we're delivering elements or potentially incremental elements, that information gets fed back into the overall scheme of the flow, so that it can be continuous improvement along the way. So improvement is the mantra of the Kanban method. So this would be a good point to break to see if we have any other questions. How are we doing out there?
I think we're all still working on our coffee this morning.
Okay.
I'd like to remind everybody, if you do have a question, to click on the question mark icon in the upper corner of your screen. Go ahead and post it in there, and I'll gather those up and let Todd know when he's ready.
Okay. Well, very good. So that's sort of the base of the Kanban method. What I'd like to go through now is the something that we've really been working on over the last few years, and in fact just came out with a new version of the Kanban maturity model book. David Anderson and Theodore Bosova have come out with the version 2.0 of the Kanban maturity model book, and I'm going to talk about how we look at resilience and agility through the evolutionary change in the Kanban maturity model. So the Kanban maturity model, we call KMM, maps 150 specific Kanban practices to observable business outcomes using 7 levels of organizational maturity, ranging from 0 oblivious to, at the end, 6 built for survival. And I'll go through these in more detail. But this is sort of the basis of what we've seen, and we've seen this as an evolutionary, since it's evolution, we've seen this step of evolution. How do people move? And it's moving from very low maturity perspective to much higher levels of maturity. So I'd say, why do we need YAM? Why do we need yet another maturity model? Haven't we had enough maturity models, and have they really actually helped us in any way? Well, I think we look at it from we've had a lot of experience in the past. David Anderson and Theodore Bosova both had a lot of experience with CMMI and other models, and they saw some of the good elements of it, but they also saw some of the challenges and problems with those models. And I said that there's some good things, but let's actually figure out what's good about them and what challenges they have. And so when we look at things, and the way I look at it, as I talk about agility, I also, as you saw, I mentioned agility and resilience. If we look at agility is our ability to change direction. How quickly can we make changes in what we do? But the other element, resilience here, is resilience is our ability to recover from adversity. How can we respond to deal with things that are adverse situations? And they're related. They're very much related. Agility and resilience are very much related, but they are different. And what we've found is that the element of resilience is much more related to maturity. Anybody can be very agile with chaos. You can be changing directions all the time, but are you able to have the resilience? Are you able to have the things that will hold you through the tough times? And that's where really levels of high maturity and high agility are what's critically important. The other element of things is we looked at from a maturity model perspective is we wanted to avoid one of the challenges we really saw with traditional maturity models. And that is that traditional maturity models tend to look at the world as a set of inputs and a set of processes which gives us outcomes and results. And we want, since our desire is that we want predictable outcomes and results, then all we need to do in order to get predictable outcomes and results is to have really strict conformance to practices, because we're going to find best practices that will control that, and the result will be consistency of outcomes and results. And it turns out that this is a very, very narrow perspective. It's a very it's effectively an open loop approach. It's a very linear type of process flow, thinking that we can control everything and that there are best practices. It doesn't involve situational perspective, or the fact that the reality is we can't know these things in advance and the situations change. The Kanban maturity model takes a different perspective. What it looks at, let's look at the outcomes and results. And based on outcomes and results, are we getting the outcomes and results we want? Are these outcomes and results ones we even care about? And then based on that, we look and say, if we're not getting the outcomes and results we want, if we're missing out in some fashion, then let's look back and figure out what changes to the process might help us get the outcome and results we're looking for. And this is a big shift, I think, in how we approach the Kanban maturity model, is turning this into that reverse feedback to try to focus really on the outcomes and results rather than on the conformance to practices. There's two particular failure modes that we've seen in Kanban and Agile implementations. And again, this is a good reason why we felt like the Kanban maturity model really adds value to us. And those two particular failure modes are overreaching, where organizations try to take on too much, or they try to take on practices that are well beyond what their maturity is able to handle. And by taking this too much on, they end up with an aborted start. The other thing we see is false summit plateaus that fail to realize the full benefit. So we get to a happy place, we're in the dissatisfier, we do a little bit of change, and now we're in a happy place, and we then get from level 0 to level 1, and we're happy at level 1, and we don't move on to level 2. We don't move on to that next level because the initial pain point has now been resolved. And that makes it what we call a false summit plateau, because there's so much more benefit that could be obtained. And we build into the model means by which the roadmap by which to continue to improve. So if we look back at our J curves and look at these two challenges, one is the overreaching, trying to take on too much. That's a big challenge, because by taking on too much, it results in big impacts and hurt to the organization, which at low maturities it results in failure. And then the other is the false summit plateau. We get a little bit of change and we stop because we don't take on. We're not able to push on beyond to get to the next level. So these are the two challenges we see, and these are things that the maturity model addresses. We're missing that benefit by taking that false plateau. So let's go through a little bit of a perspective on this. At maturity level 0, we're oblivious. It's the my way. It's very much individualism. Every customer has their pet. Individualism, it's unpredictable and unreliable service delivery. The people are overburdened. It's just people, it's effectively a form of chaos. It may very well be that good things are happening, but it's happening through individualism. It's not predictable. It's not coordinated. Typically, the result, we've got unhappy customers, we've got unhappy managers, we've got unhappy people. We've got a lot of dissatisfaction. This is not a great state to be in, but it's a very common state to be in. What we tend to do here at the very base level, let's visualize work. Let's get some understanding. Let's unhide things. Let's figure out what's happening, because at least and pull this together at the team level, because oftentimes people may have their own work that they're working, but it's not visible to everyone what other people are doing and how it's being pulled together to coordinate. Let's limit work in progress. Let's set WIP limits so we don't take on too much. Let's manage what we can get done. Let's stop starting new things and start finishing the old things. So stop starting, start finishing. Let's define some initial policies. How are we all working together? What is the criteria that we're using for work to flow through the system? And then implement feedback loops, something like the Kanban meeting, something maybe a daily meeting that just understands how things are working, or at the earliest level, maybe even just a weekly meeting to try to get things together. But some degree of coordination activity that really, once we visualize the work, then how are we pulling this together to map it and watch it work on how it's flowing. So now that we've moved on to the level 1, where we're team focused, we've got the team working together, but there's still individual heroics. It's never the same way twice, and the teams are unconnected teams. An example of this, every team reports that they deliver on their commitments, but I know that customers are waiting longer than 6 months for delivering. And this was from an Agile coach at an internet equipment manufacturer who told us this in the hallway because they weren't able to say this publicly within their company. But they knew it was the case, that the real delivery wasn't happening, but every team thought they were doing great. Well, the challenge here is that we have team Kanban boards, which is going through. They're usually quite simple. This is the type of level, the very, very basic backlog, next, in progress, done. No specific element of granularity as to the workflow, how the work is flowing. But at least it's a start point of visualizing the work, which is an evolutionary point, and then we can move on to something more. So what are the things we do? We look at the diagnosis. There's a lack of service orientation. It's just a bunch of tasks. We don't know how it's connected to the service. To the extent there's any metrics, they're localized and they're localized metrics and objectives to the extent there are any at all. There are no real customer recognizable work items. They're just usually tasks, and there's a lack of collaboration across the service delivery workflow. So this is the core diagnosis. Some of the implementation recommendations on how to implement and work with this is start with STATIK, the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. Work on understanding customer recognizable work item types, get specifically in the form that customers would recognize how things are flowing, and work on service-oriented workflow board. Implement a flow review on a regular basis to look at how is the work flowing and what can we do to continuously improve on that. And at that point, we've reached up to more or less a level 2, an aggregated team Kanban board. Now we're starting to see that there's some more specifics here on what's going on. We have multiple teams that are working, and each team has their own simple board, but at least we're starting to connect how these are working together. So we have this interconnection of teams, and we're starting to look at that flow and how is the overall service delivery happening through that process. So at level 2, we've now moved towards more of a customer-driven. It's never the same result twice. We've got managerial heroics. We've got delays and last minute, despite coordinated teams. So the type of problem statement we have, I haven't looked at the lead time chart in months. It's from a software development manager at a telecom equipment manufacturer. And this is the challenge. I mean, they are so busy, they're not looking at lead time chart, and they're not using that lead time chart data to actually drive improvements, which they certainly can do. You look at a diagnosis. Well, is there even a service delivery manager role present that's helping drive some of those activities? Are customer expectations understood and communicated? And are we doing any sort of service delivery review happening? So these are the, given the situation we've got, these are the types of questions and diagnosis we look at. We also look at, well, is there any blocker management? Is blocker likelihood and impact being reported? So are we doing any sort of risk review to look at those blockers and what's happening in the flow? And is the net result of this, is the lead time distribution thin or fat tailed? Are we have a fairly predictable range of lead times, or do we have lead times that range from 1 day to 100 days, things that make it very, very difficult to predict, which would be the fat tailed type of distribution. Understand that lead time lets us help drive improvements. So what do? We instrument and report lead time. We make sure that we have that, and we have it as a regular review point. We have a service delivery manager role that's there to help make sure that we're managing flow appropriately. We hold service delivery reviews. We look at blockers and blocker metrics. Hold a risk review in order to look at how those blockers are working and what can we do about them and what do we need to be prepared for. And we work on customer expectation. What are the fitness criteria that we're working with? And that will take us to basically a level 3 Kanban board, which at this point is a full pull system. We're able to pull items based on knowing that we have capacity to pull, and then that flow all the way through the system. That basically takes us from the commitment point where we've said, yes, we're going to do this work, through to actual delivery and customer delivery. So at that point, we're level 3, we're fit for purpose, we have predictable delivery, it's no more heroes anymore, and our processes are under control. So the type of problem statement we have at level 3 is, this is from a software development manager or a mobile application in Berlin. We just put out a release on time, met our commitments, but our product management team reacted with a WTF is this, right? And so we're predictable, but is it actually meeting customer? Is what's there, this gap to actually being fit for purpose? What's missing for being needed, what's needed by the customers? Well, the challenges here, the work items weren't meaningful and understood by the customers. So they had work items, but it wasn't really tied back to customer and customer value. There was asynchronous commitment. What we mean by asynchronous commitment was basically the team had committed to doing the work, but there wasn't really commitment from the product management and customer side that would own that commitment. So we want to drive towards more of a synchronous commitment where there's synchronization between both sides, both from the business side and from the delivery side. It was pulled from a partially committed buffer. There was no real replenishment meeting. And what we work on with the replenishment meeting is trying to continuously feed the pipeline to make sure we've got continuous delivery. So what do we implement? We implemented a 2-tiered Kanban board. What does that mean? Well, 2-tiered Kanban board means we work all the way from the upstream side to try to understand the ideas and the flow and the development of those ideas up until the point where we make the commitment that, yes, in fact, we're going to deliver on these items. So it's that upstream element of refining and understanding the ideas, making sure that they are, in fact, what customers want and that there is the market demand for these things. Then we make the commitment point, and from that point on, we're into the service delivery board. So that's the 2-tiered Kanban board. We work with a coarser grain work item type in order to really understand that, make sure that that's connected to the customer understanding. Synchronous commitment, where both sides are in the game owning the commitment all the way through to delivery. There's a full replenishment meeting with customers present, and there's synchronous commitment. So the replenishment meeting is a regular meeting back with the customers. Is this what you really want? Is just based on what we've understood and learned, what do we need to update from that? So that's a regular ongoing meeting with customers. And then the customers commit to the coarse grain work item. And at that point, we're level 4. We're risk hedged. Everyone's happy, no more surprises. So this is a pretty happy place to be. We're predictable, and customers are actually getting everything they're expecting. So this is a very good place and a happy place to be. Now we move on to the next level here, is ML5, which is market leader, simply the best. We're making marginal gains and attention to every detail. Here we're improving not because we have to, but because we want to. We want to be the best, and we want to continue to get better and better. And this is an additional level of maturity that we can drive towards. And then finally, the last level is maturity level 6, which is built for survival and reinvention. And this is where we're continuing to challenge making new identity and new purpose, trying to really figure out not just getting the best at what we do now, but getting the best at what we need to be in the future as things change around us, and potentially, in fact, entirely reinvention of the organization in order to take on new things. So with that, I'll go into just a couple of quick case studies that we had with the Kanban maturity model. The first one is BBVA, a bank in Spain, but is actually all around. In fact, we have BBVA here in Houston. And this was in Bilbao office that they were working with the Kanban maturity model, working very closely with Teodora Bosova. And this quote from them at BBVA: "We seek to continue to improve continuously, focused on our values, customer first, think big, and we are a team. We therefore decided to look at how KMM could help us achieve our goal. After a few months, we have proof that it gives us valid guidance on how to improve our level of customer service." In addition, we have a quote from Nagori Bilbao. "We developed the capability to manage based on data, not on perceptions. This helps us to foresee future needs and resolve blockages due to dependencies on other teams in a fast and simple manner." And this is, I think, a key element. You know, they were starting probably at a level 1, and they were able to move to level 3, where they got to be much more predictable, much more focused on understanding the data and understanding how their dependencies and blockers were working, so that they could take action and get to much more predictable delivery. Here we look at and these case studies are available on the Kanban.university website. They're freely available for download. So Kanban at Vanguard, and then he also was the BBVA. They have the great deal of detail on what they did, and so they're available for you to look at. In the case of Vanguard, Kanban helped Vanguard FinTech operate in a lean model and accelerated delivery value more than using just Scrum or traditional project management methods. Our teams are now starting less work before WIP is finished, work in progress is finished, and the productivity and morale of each team has increased. If we look at what was going on at the Vanguard, they had been working about a year, in particular looking here at some teams, had been working for about a year in Scrum, and they were working with a number of these teams. The coaches there these teams had been working a year in Scrum, and they're looking here now at the control chart showing the lead time as a function of time. Is the lead time staying the same or getting better? And with Scrum, it was staying constant. It was in that range, and it was manageable. It's okay, and they were not hugely unhappy in Scrum, but they'd reached what they called Scrum stall. They weren't getting any better. Things had stabilized, and they thought there was more available, and they could improve their lead times and drop it. So there were at least a little bit of motivation to try Kanban, and so within 90 days of working with Kanban and the ESP, the Enterprise Services Planning element of Kanban, they had taken their lead times and dropped them significantly. So the system lead time improved by 78% in approximately 90 days. And one of the things you see that nothing here, those are the lead times, those long lead times, that fat-tailed lead times were, lead times up to 180 days, those had disappeared. So this gives you much more predictability. So it's much more efficiency, as well as much better delivery, as well as much higher predictability. If we look at it from a cumulative flow diagram, and with cumulative flow diagram, you see that the important thing is the bottom line, the red bar, and how that's flowing. That's an indication of delivered, what's actually delivered. And you see the rate of delivery at KMM level 1 to 2 was steady, but by the movement to KMM level 3, they were able to drastically increase their throughput, increase their level of delivery, about a 4-fold level of increase at Vanguard. And these types of increases are things that we see repeatedly. This level of by implementing Kanban and implementing Kanban maturity model, we're able to see these levels of increase in throughput significant. We saw a situation here at Kanban Impact at Accenture in Brazil, and this is you know, they're going along very steady for a while, and then they show the sign, you know, before they took the KMP1 class, and then after they took the KMP1 class, and you can see, and then it's not just taking the class, but also a dedicated commitment and coaching that they were able to drastically increase their throughput after working with Kanban. So they you know, they had something working, but by improving and the KMP1 class is there to take you, the material is there that will bring you to level 3. That's the design of the course materials that the Kanban system design and the Kanban system improvement class has the material to take you to a level 3 implementation. So it's the organization that matures, not the Kanban that matures. And that's the thing. We've known how to do this for a long time, but we've also known that there are barriers in maturity that has to happen, and that's why that's the reason why we've come up with the Kanban maturity model to help us with our Kanban. So how to learn more about Kanban? This is the, you know, we are a training organization. We offer globally through our trainer network training from Team Kanban practitioner all the way up through the accredited Kanban consultant are the credentials that we offer, and we also offer, you know, we have trainers, the accredited Kanban trainer. If we look at some specifics here, the Team Kanban practitioner class is a one-day class that gives teams and team members the ability to understand how to get started and how to be a good citizen within a Kanban world. The Kanban management professional credential is a combination of 2 classes, the Kanban system design class and the Kanban one. We're not calling this the Kanban system improvement class to get away from the same credential. So one is the design of the system, and the other is how do we continue to improve and scale it out. And these 4 days together gives the Kanban management professional, and that design of that class is really all the material to help take you to a level 3 implementation. We also offer the Train the Trainer class, which is there to teach those 2 prior, those actually 3 prior classes, the Team Kanban practitioner, the Kanban system design, and the Kanban system improvement. And then we also have a more rigorous approach towards coaching professional, which involves the Kanban maturity model class and the Kanban coaching practices. How do you actually implement this in practice? And then the highest level is the accredited Kanban consultant masterclass, which is a 5-day class that David Anderson teaches on the advanced elements of coaching and how to take this implementation through evolutionary change. You want to get started, there's the Kanban Blue Book by David Anderson that's available. It's the sort of the Bible of getting started with Kanban. There's another great book by Mike Burrows, Kanban from the Inside, that really is a good explanation of the values of Kanban and also does a good documentation of STATIK. There is the Kanban maturity model, version 2.0 is just out now, at least available in electronic version. The physical copy is coming shortly. We also offer essential Kanban guides that are available on our website. The Essential Kanban Condensed Guide and the Essential Upstream Kanban, these are both freely downloadable from our website. And then there's my book and my contact information, Stand Back and Deliver, not really about Kanban, but really more about business agility and my contact information. So with that, we've got a few minutes left for questions, see what we've come up with, and happy to answer anything that you got.
Yes, Todd. We do have 2 questions thus far, and okay. Why don't I present them both to you and see if you want to address them together or separately.
Okay.
The first one was, what's the difference between Kanban and Scrum? How do they relate to each other? Okay. And then the second one was, dev teams use Scrum, operations use Kanban. How to streamline as DevOps teams as these come together? Okay.
All right. So yeah. So. Yeah, both of those are common misconceptions, and I'll I'll take them and I'll figure out whether I'm answering both of them at the same time or separately or both. But because it's a very interesting perspective. So let me say first that how do Kanban and Scrum work together? How are they different? So the important thing I think you look at is Scrum is a framework for product delivery. That is fundamentally what it's about. It's a framework for product delivery. Kanban is an approach for evolutionary change to managing knowledge work. So what that means is they really are quite different in their approach to they're doing different things. Now, Kanban can be used for product delivery with or without Scrum, and this is the important thing. Kanban is a start with what you do now. So if you're currently using Scrum, you can look at Kanban and add it on top of Scrum and say, let's look at Scrum as what we do today. Kanban is going to help us evolve that to something better. We're going to get continuously better because we're going to understand what we do now, which is Scrum, and we're going to look at designing experiments that help us get better at that. So Scrum and Kanban do work quite well together now, and there are some people that say, okay, we're doing Scrumban. Now, usually when they're saying they're doing Scrumban, what that means is they've taken a very low maturity implementation of Kanban and stopped there. What we have when we've got teams that have evolved to higher levels, they will have started with Scrum. They will have applied Kanban improvement approaches to it, and at some point in time, they start shedding elements of Scrum, which means they're no longer doing Scrum by the book. But the point is that that's not what's really important. What's important is they're getting better. And that's what Kanban is about. Kanban is about continuously improving and getting better. So in that sense, that's how Scrum and Kanban are similar and different and also compatible. So that's a little bit of a, I could go into this for a long time, but I think that's sort of let's pause it at that point. The other element that was brought out in the second question is, well, Scrum is for projects and Kanban is for operations. And this is a huge misconception. This is a perspective that and I think it is true that Scrum really only works for projects. So you can't really you can't even really use Scrum for operations well. Now, there are some people who will try it and some people who have done it, but operations doesn't lend itself to product delivery. Operations is piecemeal pieces. And Kanban's approach is, we don't care whether it's operations or projects, we're about service delivery. And service delivery can be in the form of projects, service delivery can be in the form of operations. And Kanban can work very well in either case. We're about trying to get the best out of it, no matter what it is. So I think that there's been an element where Kanban has been boxed into this perspective that Kanban is only used in operations, where in fact that's very, very much untrue. Kanban can be used across the board. Kanban's a process, an evolutionary change to managing any knowledge work, and can be used pretty much across the board anywhere, and can be used to, and as I say earlier, it can be used to improve your Scrum and get better. And that's usually what I tell seasoned Scrum coaches is they really should understand some of the basics of Kanban, because it's about getting better at your craft. And if you're a Scrum Master doing your thing, an Agile coach, you really need to understand all that's out there. You should be broadening your world to get out there, because there's a lot to be offered from a number of different things, Kanban being one of those things that should be in your toolkit. Any other questions or any other clarification on that?
So at that, we don't have any further questions yet, and we are almost to the end of our time. Any final questions? Well,
and if anyone has anything, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to talk to you and see what else we can do for you.
So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending today's session, and thank you, Todd, for sharing with us all. The recording of this session will be available later at HoustonTechFest.com. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of Virtual Houston Tech Fest, and have a great day.
All right, thank you very much.
And